I was born right here in Traverse City, Michigan at 901 West 7th Street, 72233. And I was blessed with a wonderful family. I had a brother that was 2 years and 9 months older than I was, and then along came my sister about 11 years later. So there were 3 siblings. My dad was a piano tuner and a motion picture projectionist. My mother was a LPN and worked at the hospital during the war time. And you know, in those days, you can come home and have dinner with the family. And I think that was, I had a loving family, and my remembrance of it was always so friendly and cordial, and we had relation. Traverse City was a small town back in 1930s and 40s. It was, in fact, when I learned to drive the car, when I was 14 and got my driver's license, I could have the road to myself, you know. But it's changed, and which is for the better. But yes, I lived in Traverse City, went to Elmwood School, which is now torn down and it was taken over by Willow Hill School. Went to junior high, which is up on 7th Street. That would be the 8th and 9th grade, and then senior high, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and graduated in 1951 from Traverse City Senior High School. And I was lucky that I learned to play the trombone and the piano, so I was in the band and played in the dance band and the pep band and orchestra. We traveled to Ann Arbor. We got some first places there with Floyd Heidenberg and Ray Opeland as the directors. It was a great experience, and if I had to do it over again, I don't think I'd do it any differently. Well, I worked at WTCM since 1951 through 2009. Many capacities. I was a staff announcer, read commercials, newscaster, disc jockey, and even swept the floor and mopped the control room. I was fortunate that Les Biederman wanted me to do television from 1963 to 1974. I did the 7:25 and the 8:25 news inserts in the Today Show that had Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs starring on there. And we would do the 5-minute report. We'd have Michigan news, sports, and weather. And it was a lot of fun. I did it in the morning, and it was a learning process, you know, how to work. We didn't have color then. It was just the image orthicon TV cameras. And if we had any pictures, we called them teleops. We would actually take a picture of it with another camera. And when I said, Governor Bill Milliken today said they would put up a picture of Bill Milliken. So I worked as a control room operator and announcer for Les Biederman and the Midwestern Broadcasting Company. It's the only radio station I ever worked for, WTCM. We were back at 1400 on the radio dial. And in later years, we upped the power from 250 to 50,000 watts. Now we're 100,000 watts. And the radio station moved to 580 on the dial, which is a better position. Radio has always been a fascination for me. Way back in 1941 when the station came to town and I saw the tower being put up. And as a kid, 8 years old, I said, I want to be a part of that. To think that you could talk into a microphone and people all over the region can hear what you have to say. Well, luckily, Les gave me a chance in 1951, graduating from high school, to become a control room operator. I worked the night shift for 13 years, learned the trade on the job. Actually, when I went to work, I knew how to work the board right away because I hung around the station all the time. My dad was a piano tuner, and I used to go up to the Anderson building with him, and they had 2 grand pianos. And while he was tuning the pianos, I would watch the fella in the control room. And one day, Les came up to me and saw my nose pressed against the glass looking in the window, and he said, do you like this work? I said, I love it. And he says, well, I tell you what, when you grow up, come back and see me. I took him up on it, and so 58 years later, I was still working. Finally, in '09, I said, it's time to smell the roses and have some time with my wife and be able to do other things. Radio is fascinating to me, and it's changed so much. When we started out, it was entertainment, and now it's kind of an informational with talk radio coming here today. And I can see the evolution. And I've seen the technical change. When I started working, we had 78 records. Well, they don't have anything like that anymore. There's not a transcription or anything used. It's all on the computer. In fact, when I do an interview, I can go back and edit it and take out words that aren't good or something if they make a mistake, you know. And before we couldn't do that because we put it on tape, and you had to cut the tape and thread it and tape it up, splice it, you know. So it's a different operation today, but I say it's for the better. I think radio has never been stronger. Radio is a companion. It can go with you wherever you are. I didn't go into it thinking I was a star or anything like that. I was just the guy that was doing the job, you know. And people related to me because I was natural, and I didn't talk down to them. I always talked across the table, like that was my dad over there I was talking to. I would visualize that. In fact, he told me, he says, he called me Zeke. That was my nickname. And he said, Zeke, he says, you don't realize how many people listen to you. And you really don't, because you're in a control room, which is controlled, and you have a microphone. Well, I mean, you just have to start thinking about what am I going to say that'll make sense and will be heard. So that's something I had to accept. Now, what I was able to do was be a news announcer. I could give people information on the weather. I could also talk to them about their favorite records that they like to hear. They'd call up and say, hey, can you play Jimmy Durante's new hit or Spike Jones? And so I had communication that way. But one of the thing that really did it for me is when I took over Farm and Orchard Time. I did that for 46 years. That was a program that Les wanted to have because he believed that this area was agriculture, and that was where the future of the area stood. Diversification came in as well. Now people are growing blueberries, they're doing asparagus, and they're branching out. In other words, don't put all of your eggs in that one basket. It's a cliche, but it's a good one, and it's something to follow. Yes, we said the cherry growers are actually gamblers. If they have a good crop, they may gain. If they have too good a crop, then the price goes down and they don't do so well. And if they're wiped out as they were one year, we didn't have any cherries at all. Here they've gone ahead and had to put spray out and products in the orchards and no return on it. So they start out with nothing the next year. And another thing about the cherry industry, they don't get paid that year for their crop. They get paid the next year for it.
I came here on vacation in 1978. My cousin and her husband lived here, and their association with the arts and culture in the community, NMC and the Traverse Area Arts Council, led me to be drawn to the city. The collaboration with the Old Town Playhouse and the Arts Council and the people of this region were really exciting and interesting. So, like many people do today, in 1980, I came here and chose this city without a job and came looking for work and ended up working for the Arts Council and the Old Town Playhouse back in 1980. I immediately became involved with the arts community, certainly as director of the Old Town Playhouse and the Arts Council for many years, but I was also interested in the sense of place that was so evident in this community and emerging in many ways. I was drawn to the fact that on the radio one day I heard that the mayor, Carol Hale, and the city attorney were stopping the state from tearing down historic buildings at the former psychiatric hospital. And I thought, this is a place I'd really like to get involved in the government where the city is standing up to the state and trying to save those historic buildings. And so while I was working at the Playhouse, I ran for the city commission and was elected in 1985 and re-elected in 1989. I had the distinct honor of serving as mayor in 1988, which was, in fact, the very year that the state hospital closed and closed out. I think at that point they had 200 and some patients. In 1990, the Downtown Development Authority and the Downtown Traverse City Association had reached agreement amid a great deal of concern about the challenges facing downtown. The new mall was coming, J.C. Penney's was leaving, the future of the Park Place Hotel was of concern. And so I resigned from the City Commission and the Old Town Playhouse about 10 years after arriving here to take the position with the Downtown Development Authority. That focus for the downtown offered me a unique opportunity. As someone interested in the community and being on the City Commission, I cared about a lot of things, the neighborhoods and downtown survival, but I didn't care so much about sewage treatment plants and those kinds of things. So I was really able to throw myself into the job of worrying about downtown's future. We were able initially to start thinking about what the greatest challenges for a future downtown were going to be. Obviously, empty spaces like JCPenney's were of concern, but there's also a recognition that we needed to try to bring connectivity to downtown for the pedestrian, that they should feel an enjoyable experience. And a lot of downtown had been torn down over the years to make room for parking lots, and fires had eliminated 5-story buildings and there were 1-story buildings. And then we had, of course, the abandoned ironworks factory sitting in the middle of the downtown and the Old Town neighborhood. The important thing for any downtown, I think, is to worry about what they wanted to be when they grew up. And there wasn't a great deal of thought about that. There were big proposals that had been voted down, and I often say to other downtowns, if it's one easy answer, it's probably not a good one. Because they're very complex. They involve everything from whether there are dead flies in the merchants' windows all the way up to $10 and $50 million redevelopment projects. So the DDA had started, just as I came on board, a streetscapes project, worrying about the most basic of things, the sidewalks, the trees, and that whole environment in those 4 main blocks on Front Street. And building on that, we began to try to pull everybody together and talk about the kind of improvements we needed to bring back some of this walkability and some of the density. We learned that downtown, about 2/3 of downtown was gone from its peak in the 1960s due to fires and parking lots. And so the planning elements were really important. And the ironworks was a perfect example. We could have had a 1-story drugstore and the rest in parking lot. And instead, we've ended up with a mixture of uses, Haggerty Insurance with over 500 employees. If someone had told me when I was mayor in the late 80s that we would have over 500 employees in one business downtown, I would have said no, never going to happen. But we have people living downtown. When I was on the City Commission, there's a required position on the DDA that they be a resident, there be a resident of the district, and it was vacant for many, many years because there was simply not that many people lived downtown, and none of them were necessarily interested. A couple of years ago, we had 3 of the 12 members who are actually residents of downtown, and we currently have 2, and our chair is a resident of downtown. So those redevelopments were really part of my job early on, was inspirational, cheerleader. We can hold on through this new mall and survive, but we've got to recognize that it's going to change. Some of the changes that became apparent is that we weren't going to see the traditional anchors of downtown. We forecast that the day would come when Milliken's department store would leave, along with JCPenney's, and Montgomery Ward had left. And we knew that there was going to be something new, and we were so lucky. 2 things happened. The Park Place Hotel was purchased by the Traverse City Rotary Charities and revamped, reinvigorated, and reopened at a loss. That was one of the greatest gifts Rotary Charities ever gave to downtown, because Horizon Books had the courage to make one of the biggest changes, and that was expanding from their very small bookstore into the JCPenney's space. Downtown's disappeared across the country over time. It didn't happen overnight. And their reinvigoration has come from one step at a time, worrying about one thing. And Horizon Books and Rotary's investment were two big steps back to bringing back some of the vitality of downtown. Who would have ever thought that a coffee shop and or bookstore would be an anchor for the new downtowns? But that's exactly what has happened.
I grew up in St. Joseph, Michigan, just right down the coast. Went to school at Michigan State University and moved up here June of 1973, almost 40 years ago, right after college. So Traverse City is really the town I grew up in. And I came mostly because my college sweetheart, soon to be my husband, was from here and he wanted to come home. And I couldn't imagine wanting to go home until I got here. And I fell in love with the area. It had some of the same beautiful scenery and landscape as where I was used to growing up on the shores of Lake Michigan. But there was a little bit of difference about it. Somehow it had a smaller town kind of feeling, more of a welcoming feeling. And it was just the place where I knew I wanted to be, at least for a while. So I became pretty involved early on in the formation of the first Women's Resource Center and ended up serving on their first board of directors, founding the center, and then ended up writing grants to get support for the center because of my background in journalism. And then that blossomed into a career basically in the nonprofit sector as a fundraiser. So I wrote grants, I wrote letters of appeal, I became a fundraiser, and I have worked subsequently for Women's Resource Center, for two of the hospitals. I worked for Osteopathic Hospital, and now a part of Munson and Paul Oliver Hospital, now also a part of Munson. Went to work also at Interlochen Center for the Arts. And from there, I've been really involved in land use issues in our region as a volunteer primarily. Land use and women's issues, I think, are the two things that I'm really interested in. What an incredible gift Rotary Charities has been to our region, and it's been a really honor and privilege for me to have been a part, to be able to play a part in that. I came to Rotary Charities in 1993. One of the wonderful things that Rotary Charities has done is they've incubated different kinds of organizations. They incubated actually the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, Grand Traverse Regional Community Foundation. So my first 3 years with Rotary, I was actually staffed to, I was a loaned executive to the Community Foundation and helped form that really instrumental organization that's really all about increasing endowments for our area and continuing our legacy. After that, the guy who hired me, my predecessor, Rob Collier, left, and I was appointed Executive Director of Rotary Charities. So building on that incredible community legacy, the Foundation's been able to do really terrific things that have made a really big difference in our region. Things that folks will recognize, capital projects, the Park Place Hotel, the State Theater, the Land Conservancy that I've mentioned before. Most major projects around here have had the Rotary mark on them somehow. We've been involved in issues that are tough issues, homelessness. We've been involved in issues related to affordable housing, Boardman River Dam removal, some things I think 50 years from now folks will look back and say, wow, they had their fingers in just about every pot. I think by looking back, which is a part of course, what the History Center does, it also gives you a framework to move forward. So when I was afforded the opportunity to look back at Rotary Charities history, and we've been in existence 35 years now, I looked back and saw that there were principles that guided every decision that Rotary Charities had made. So part of the thing that I was able to do was extrapolate those and talk about those and use those as our continuing framework to move forward. And let me give you an example. One of the ones from the very beginning has been that we are a Rotary-based organization. It's really shaped our values, it's shaped our guiding principles, and it's also brought a certain amount of business acumen, if you will, to the decisions that we've made. So when I think about how we're going to move forward, it's going to be using those same things. It's going to be using the Rotary values, truth, fairness, goodwill, and mutual benefit in ways that will accomplish a greater good for the entire community, and in ways that will continue to, like all good businesses do, innovate and change. So One of the things I guess I'm most proud about when we think about legacies has been the creation of North Sky Nonprofit Network, which is our capacity building arm of Rotary Charities. So in addition to helping with capital projects, starting new programs, we've been able actually to help organizations look at how they can better achieve their missions by creating more efficiencies, more effectiveness, by further involving volunteers, by building stronger boards. It's really been a way to help them build long-term sustainability beyond just a one-time grant that we could give for a capital project.